My beloved child. Before this message reaches its final moment, one tiny detail may stay in your heart longer than anything else you hear today. Somewhere in this world, a person who has never truly left your destiny carries a name that begins with a letter connected to your journey in ways you cannot yet explain. Do not rush ahead. Every second matters because the clue is never revealed the way people expect. Most people search for a full name, but destiny always whispers through a single beginning. That first letter becomes a quiet signature, appearing in unexpected places, crossing your path again and again until you finally notice it. Stay with this story because the final clue is hidden inside the journey, not at the beginning. What you dismiss today could become the memory you remember tomorrow. The greatest surprises never arrive with noise. They arrive with a feeling that refuses to disappear, and today that feeling has already started following you. Look carefully at the moments you've forgotten. Have you ever noticed the same letter appearing on signs, books, usernames, license plates, or random messages when you least expected it? Most people smile, ignore it, and keep walking. But what if those moments were quietly building one picture? Imagine discovering that every coincidence was simply one piece of a puzzle waiting for the final connection. This is why you cannot skip even a single moment of this message. The letter is not important because it predicts the future. It is important because it becomes a symbol that your heart keeps recognizing before your mind does. Somewhere, someone whose story is moving closer to yours is unknowingly carrying that first letter into every ordinary day, while you continue walking through life without realizing how close your paths may eventually become. Sometimes destiny hides in the smallest details because only those who pay attention are ready to understand them. Now listen even more carefully. Certain letters naturally leave stronger emotional impressions than others. Perhaps you have always felt strangely drawn toward one specific initial without knowing why. Maybe every unforgettable person you've met shared something connected to that same beginning. Maybe songs, places, favorite memories, or meaningful conversations somehow circle back to it. These patterns often feel invisible until someone points them out. Suddenly everything seems connected. That is exactly why today's mystery grows stronger with every passing second. The answer is never handed over all at once. It unfolds layer by layer until your own memories begin revealing clues you overlooked for years. Keep that mysterious letter in your thoughts without forcing any conclusion. The more naturally you observe your own experiences, the more surprising the connections become. Sometimes the smallest beginning leads to the greatest story, and every unforgettable love story begins with only one first letter before it becomes an entire name. The most unexpected part has not arrived yet. Somewhere tonight, tomorrow, or even weeks from now, your eyes may suddenly stop on one particular initial, and for reasons you cannot explain, it will feel different from every other letter around it. You will wonder why your attention refused to move away. That single moment is where this journey truly begins. Do not chase the answer. Let it come naturally, because the strongest connections are never forced. They appear quietly, almost invisibly, until one unforgettable moment makes everything feel strangely familiar. And when that moment comes, you may remember this very message and realize that the biggest mystery was never about discovering a complete name. It was about recognizing the first sign that your heart had been noticing long before your mind ever did. The next part reveals why one specific group of letters keeps appearing at exactly the right time, and the reason is far more unexpected than anyone imagines. A quiet truth is about to unfold, and this is where everything becomes even more fascinating. People often believe that every letter carries the same meaning, but that is rarely how memorable stories begin. Some initials seem to appear with unusual persistence, almost as if they are waiting for the exact moment you are ready to notice them. Perhaps you've recently paused on a profile, glanced at a book cover, overheard a name in a crowd, or seen a single letter standing out from everything around it. At first it felt ordinary. Then it happened again. And again. That is when curiosity begins replacing coincidence. Stay with this journey because the next clue is not about guessing. It is about recognizing a pattern that has quietly followed you for longer than you realize. The beginning of someone's name can become the first chapter of a story that neither of you expected to write. There is another detail that most people completely overlook. Every unforgettable connection starts long before two people ever meet. It begins with tiny moments that seem unrelated until one day they fit together perfectly. Imagine looking back months from now and realizing that the same initial had been crossing your path the entire time. Suddenly, random encounters would no longer feel random. A forgotten conversation, an old notebook, a passing advertisement, even a simple greeting could take on an entirely new meaning. This is why patience matters more than certainty. The answer is never found by chasing every possibility. It is discovered by allowing the right clues to reveal themselves naturally. As this story moves forward, the mystery surrounding that first letter becomes stronger, and the next revelation may completely change the way you notice everyday moments. Now consider something even more surprising. What if the letter itself is only the beginning of a much bigger message? What if its true purpose is not to tell you who someone is, but to remind you that meaningful connections often arrive through the smallest signs first? Many people spend their lives searching for dramatic answers while overlooking the gentle details placed directly in front of them. That is why this message continues step by step instead of revealing everything at once. Every layer prepares you for the next one. Every clue makes the final picture a little clearer. Somewhere ahead, another piece of this mystery is waiting, and when it appears, you may suddenly understand why this particular title caught your attention today instead of any other. The journey has only reached its halfway point, and the strongest revelation is still being carefully held back. Before moving forward, hold on to one thought. If a certain initial has already come to your mind while listening to this story, do not dismiss it too quickly. But do not assume it is the final answer either. Let the mystery breathe. Let every new clue build naturally instead of rushing toward a conclusion. Sometimes the most unforgettable discoveries happen when expectations are set aside. In the next chapter, the focus shifts from the letter itself to the hidden reason it keeps resurfacing in unexpected places. That is where this story takes its biggest turn, because the connection between an initial and a meaningful encounter is far deeper than it first appears, and what comes next may be the clue you've been waiting for all along. Everything changes from this moment forward. Until now, you have been thinking about a single letter, but the real mystery has never been the letter itself. The mystery is why certain initials seem to leave a lasting impression while hundreds of others disappear from memory within seconds. Think back carefully. There may have been times when you read dozens of names in a single day, yet only one stayed in your thoughts for no clear reason. It wasn't louder. It wasn't more important. It simply refused to leave your mind. That is the kind of detail people often ignore until much later, when they suddenly realize it had been quietly following them all along. This is why you must stay focused, because the next layer of this story is not about chance, it is about recognition. Sometimes your heart notices familiar patterns long before your eyes understand why they matter. Picture yourself months from now, looking back at this exact moment. Imagine remembering how a single initial kept appearing in the most unexpected places. A headline. A gift. A forgotten note. A passing conversation. None of these moments seemed connected when they happened. But together, they formed a trail so subtle that only someone paying close attention could see it. That is how unforgettable stories often begin, not with a grand announcement, but with quiet repetitions that slowly become impossible to ignore. The more naturally you observe life, the more these small details begin fitting together. Every coincidence starts feeling less random, and every ordinary moment begins carrying a little more meaning than it did before. Now comes the part that very few people ever consider. What if the first letter is not trying to reveal someone's identity at all? What if it is simply preparing you to recognize the right person when your paths finally cross? That changes everything. Instead of searching everywhere for a specific name, you begin noticing how naturally certain people stand out without effort. You stop forcing answers and start paying attention to genuine connections. Suddenly, the mystery becomes more exciting because it is no longer about predicting the future, it is about becoming aware of the moments already unfolding around you. The greatest discoveries rarely happen because someone was desperately searching. They happen because someone was finally paying attention. And yet, the biggest surprise has not been revealed. The next part uncovers why one particular letter can suddenly feel more significant after a completely ordinary day, and why countless people only recognize its importance after the moment has already passed. That hidden reason transforms this entire story in a way almost no one expects. Once you hear it, you may never look at a simple initial the same way again. The final pieces are beginning to come together, and what happens next may connect every clue you've heard so far into one unforgettable revelation. The mystery is finally becoming clearer, but not in the way most people expect. By now, you may already have one or two letters quietly resting in your mind. Do not rush to choose between them. The strongest connections are never built on speed, they are built on recognition. There comes a moment when an ordinary day suddenly feels different because one small detail captures your attention without warning. You hear a name across a room. You notice an initial on a sign. You pause for just a second longer than usual. It feels simple, almost forgettable, yet something inside you refuses to move on. That quiet pause is where unforgettable stories often begin. The first letter is not meant to answer every question. It is meant to awaken your curiosity and prepare you for a connection that feels surprisingly familiar when it finally appears. Think about how many people have entered and left your life without leaving a lasting memory. Then think about the rare few you still remember years later. They were different for reasons you could never fully explain. Sometimes it was a conversation. Sometimes it was their kindness. Sometimes it was simply the feeling they left behind. Now imagine that one of those unforgettable moments begins with an initial you've been noticing all along. Suddenly, every small clue starts fitting together like pieces of a hidden picture. What once looked ordinary becomes meaningful. What once seemed random begins to feel connected. That is why this journey has unfolded one step at a time instead of revealing everything at once. The real surprise has never been the letter, it has always been the story waiting behind it. Here's the final twist before the last chapter. The letter that keeps returning to your thoughts may not be the one you expected when this video began. As you've listened, another initial may have quietly replaced the first one in your mind. That change matters more than you realize because meaningful stories often guide your attention naturally instead of forcing it. The moment you stop trying to predict every answer is the moment the most interesting clues begin appearing. Keep that thought close, because the final chapter reveals why the beginning of a name can become the beginning of an unforgettable journey, and why the smallest detail sometimes creates the biggest impact long after the moment has passed. If this story has held your attention until now, there is one reason: you are following the clues instead of rushing to the ending. Share this video with someone who enjoys mysterious soulmate stories, and if you want more journeys filled with hidden clues and emotional twists, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. The final chapter is where every clue you've collected comes together, and the conclusion is far more memorable than the mystery that started it all. Everything has led to this final moment. From the very beginning, you believed this journey was about discovering one specific letter. But now you can see that the letter was only the doorway. The true revelation has always been about awareness. A single initial becomes unforgettable not because someone tells you it matters, but because your own memories begin attaching meaning to it. One day, without planning it, you may hear a name that starts with that familiar letter, and instead of feeling ordinary, it will instantly remind you of this very journey. In that moment, you won't feel like you found an answer. You'll feel like a forgotten piece of a much larger story has quietly fallen into place. That is why the biggest discoveries rarely arrive with certainty. They arrive with recognition. Imagine looking back after months have passed. You begin remembering every small clue that once seemed insignificant. The repeated initial. The unexpected conversation. The random encounter. The tiny moments you almost ignored. Suddenly, those scattered memories no longer feel separate. They form one complete picture. That is how unforgettable connections often reveal themselves, not through dramatic signs, but through ordinary moments that gain meaning over time. The beginning of a name becomes the beginning of a memory, and that memory becomes the beginning of a story you never expected to tell. What seemed impossible to notice at first becomes impossible to forget once everything connects together. Now comes the final thought to carry with you. Never let curiosity become certainty. Let every meaningful connection grow naturally. A letter can inspire wonder, but real relationships are built through trust, kindness, shared experiences, and genuine understanding. That is why this mystery ends with possibility rather than prediction. The most beautiful stories are not written because someone guessed the ending. They become unforgettable because each chapter unfolded at exactly the right time. If a certain initial continues appearing in your life after today, simply notice it with an open mind and enjoy the mystery. Sometimes the smallest beginning creates the most meaningful journey, and sometimes the very first letter becomes the quiet reminder that extraordinary stories often start in the simplest ways. And so the mystery reaches its ending, but the journey continues with you. Somewhere ahead, new moments, new conversations, and new memories are waiting to be created. Whether the familiar letter appears tomorrow or much later, let it remind you to stay open to meaningful connections instead of rushing toward conclusions. The greatest love stories are remembered not because they began with certainty, but because they began with hope, patience, and a heart willing to notice the little things. Perhaps that is the real secret hidden behind every unforgettable first letter. Not that it predicts your future, but that it teaches you to recognize the beauty in every new beginning. The story may be ending, but one final mystery remains. Long after this video is over, there is a chance that one particular letter will quietly return to your attention. You won't be searching for it. You won't expect it. Yet it may appear in the most ordinary place at the most unexpected time. When it does, don't treat it as a prediction. Treat it as a reminder of everything you've heard today, that remarkable stories often begin with the smallest details. A single initial can spark curiosity, but it is your choices, your kindness, and the people you genuinely connect with that give any story its true meaning. That is the difference between chasing an answer and appreciating a journey. One day, you may meet someone whose name begins with the very letter that has stayed in your thoughts throughout this message. Perhaps it will make you smile for a moment. Perhaps it will remind you of this mysterious journey. But the real surprise will not be the letter itself. The real surprise will be discovering how naturally meaningful conversations, shared laughter, and unforgettable memories are created when two people truly understand one another. Every lasting connection begins with a first impression, every first impression begins with a name, and every name begins with a single letter. That simple truth is what has been hidden inside this mystery from the very beginning. As you leave this story behind, carry one final thought with you. Never underestimate the power of paying attention to life's smallest moments. The greatest memories are rarely planned. They grow from ordinary days that become extraordinary only after we look back on them. Whether the familiar initial appears again tomorrow, next month, or much later, let it remind you to stay open to new friendships, new opportunities, and genuine connections. The beginning of a name is only the beginning of a story. Everything that follows is written by the moments you create, the people you value, and the memories that stay with you long after the mystery has faded. Thank you for staying until the very end of this journey. Every clue, every twist, and every moment of suspense has led to one timeless idea. Sometimes the smallest beginning leaves the biggest impression. And perhaps, somewhere in the future, when that familiar letter catches your eye once again, you won't simply remember this story, you'll remember that every unforgettable chapter starts with one small beginning, one meaningful moment, and one simple letter that opened the door to endless possibilities. Just when it seems the journey has reached its end, one final layer quietly reveals itself. The letter you've been thinking about is no longer just an initial, it has become a symbol of patience. Every meaningful story begins long before anyone realizes it has started. While people search for instant answers, unforgettable connections often grow silently, hidden inside ordinary days. That is why this message never asked you to believe in certainty. It asked you to notice the little details that most people walk past without a second thought. Sometimes the beginning of a name becomes unforgettable simply because it appears at exactly the right moment, leaving an impression that stays with you far longer than expected. Picture yourself sometime in the future, smiling as you remember this very story. You won't remember every sentence, but you will remember the feeling of curiosity it created. Then, almost unexpectedly, you'll come across a familiar initial once again. It could be written on a notebook, displayed on a screen, mentioned in a conversation, or spoken by someone you've only just met. For a brief moment, everything will feel strangely familiar. Not because the letter has magical power, but because your mind has learned to notice what it once ignored. That quiet moment of recognition is what makes life's smallest surprises so memorable. Every great story begins with awareness before it becomes a memory. There is one final secret hidden inside this entire journey. The first letter of a name can capture your attention, but it can never define the person behind it. Real connections are discovered through honesty, respect, laughter, shared experiences, and the moments that naturally bring two lives together. That is why this story was never about finding one perfect answer. It was about reminding you that curiosity opens doors, while genuine relationships are built one conversation, one smile, and one meaningful moment at a time. The most unforgettable chapters are never rushed, they unfold naturally, making every step feel worthwhile. And now, as this chapter closes, another one quietly waits beyond it. Somewhere ahead are new conversations, unexpected encounters, and moments you cannot predict today. Whether the familiar letter appears again or not, let this journey remind you to stay open to meaningful experiences and appreciate the beauty of new beginnings. After all, every remarkable story starts with something incredibly small. Sometimes it begins with a single word. Sometimes with a single glance. And sometimes it all begins with a single letter that inspires you to pay closer attention to the world around you.